Here comes Abbie on her overhead pattern, Tanker 8.8. Now she got to pin it right down here near the numbers. Excellent job. There's the reverse thrust. Look at that windsock. A quartering tailwind, just the worst conditions. Hey, it's Tuesday, July 5th. My name's Juan Brown. You're watching the Blanco Lirio channel, and today we have a very exclusive interview with one of the pilots of these CalFire tankers, the S2-T. Meet Abbie Cruz.
Hey, guys.
She's the pilot of 8.9. You rotate between 8.8 and 8.9?
Yeah, I switch between Tanker 8.8 and 8.9.
She's going to show us all around this air tanker. Check it out. Abbie, how long you been flying these tankers now?
I started flying for CalFire in 2017, and I did the Airtanker platform, which is the OV-10 Bronco, the first year, and then I transitioned into the tanker.
So you switched up right away, 1 year of Bronco and then into the tanker.
Yeah, our program is changing a bit. We just changed our schedule to include more days off for flight safety and things like that. So we had to add a bunch of pilots for that, and then we're also getting C-130s in a couple years. So we're hiring a lot of pilots and trying to get them through the tanker pipeline as fast as possible.
And the new schedule's 10 on, 5 off?
Yep.
That's
yeah,
great
really
improvement.
Nice. It used to be 6 and 1 or 12 and 2, depending on where you were at, which in the middle of the summer when you're working like 10 to 14 hours a day, it can get pretty brutal.
Yeah.
So for CRM and ORM, stuff like that,
fatigue and all that, and morale, and so you got OV-10. You get trained up on the OV-10 pretty quick if you're current qualified multi, but the tanker, that takes at least 1 to 2 seasons.
1 to 2 years, depending on how the fire activity is and your prior experience. We sometimes hire people who are prior IA rated tanker captains or have been in a tanker before, and typically their spool up time is a lot faster just because they already kind of know the mission. But in general, somebody who hasn't been a tanker pilot previously takes a year or two to go through the training program.
So of course, once you're current qualified flying the air tanker, it's a single pilot operation, correct?
Yep.
Yeah. And then, so tell us about the air tanker itself here. You're running the turbine engines now, so these are the Garrett direct drive?
Yeah, the Garrett TPE 331s.
Putting out about how many horsepower?
It's rated to 1650, and the thermodynamic limit's about 1850.
And the 5-bladed prop, and these were converted quite a few years ago from the original round engines, the 1820s I think you were running back in the day. Yeah. And you got a tank that's good for how many gallons?
1,200 gallons.
1,200 gallon tank, and that's a constant flow computerized controlled tank. So
yeah, there's a computer that has a bunch of sensors in the tank, and it modulates the door opening speed based on how much volume of retardant's already in there and the pressure, basically, so that it will have a nice even coverage level over the ground. So coverage level means how many gallons per 100 square feet over the ground.
Yeah, and we'll look at that inside the aircraft. So for example, coverage level 6 would be 6 gallons per 100 square feet, or a 10 by 10 square.
And that's a coverage level that we'll use in like heavy timber.
Yep. And grasses would be something more like 4 or
4 or 3.
And then looking at your tank here, is this air intake to help?
Well, actually the air intake is back here. There's like there's a couple of negative pressure valves inside there. I think there's 5 total. There's a bunch further back.
So as the retardant leaves, it doesn't create a suction. Yeah. And we'll talk more about the art of the drop here in a minute as well, once we get inside the airplane. Back here is where you load the retardant. How quick can you turn these airplanes here?
So it takes about 2 minutes to load, so you'll see the pipe over there. The firefighter brings it up, hooks it on right here, and he's looking at these lights here. There's like some green lights that go up. that show them every 100 gallons of retardant.
And how?
That's kind of how he judges it.
And say again the gallons that you're typically looking for a load out of here.
So out of Grass Valley, we start with 1,000. We always start with 1,000 based on our fuel load, and then as we burn down fuel, we can add more retardant.
And is that a full load for these tanks? At 1,000, 1,200 was full. Okay. And then so the loaders, I see them out here doing that 2 minutes. The engines are running, and then they unload, and then you peel out, and then they're doing push-ups down here on the grass. What's that all about?
Yeah, so at this base, it's just kind of I don't know if it's a joke or just a training thing. Whenever they're like under or over on the load we request, they have to do 2 push-ups per, I think, gallon under or over.
So what do you have can you tell them exactly how many gallons you got?
Yeah, when we're rolling, we tell them that we're rolling, and we call the specific gallonage that we got. So, and then the ramp, the guy who's like controlling the ramp and parking the aircraft, if the loader gets a perfect 1,000 or perfect whatever we request, then he's the one who's got to do push-ups.
Aha, good. Yeah. Good. Well, let's go inside and check this thing out.
Yeah, and the S2 was a Cold War era sub-hunter. We didn't talk about that before, but they had radar and torpedoes, and that was the previous job of it. 8.9 and 8.8 were manufactured one right after another in 1966, I believe. So there's a lot of history in these aircraft.
Great. So looking in here, first off, this is incredibly clean in here. Do they clean it up just because this is your airplane, or are they all like this?
They're all like this.
Are you? You're not in here keeping it this clean.
I don't clean it. Ed keeps it really nice and clean.
It sure does. So this is your main hydraulic system here for the aircraft,
main hydraulic reservoir,
which covers your gear, flaps.
Yeah, the gear, the flaps, the brakes, and then we have like rudder trimmer panel that has like
that assists for single engine
stuff. Yeah.
We had another hydraulic tank. Is that just for the tank itself?
That's the separate 3,000 psi hydraulic system for the retardant tank. And what I was explaining to you before, there's actually not the emergency jettison system, which is also nitrogen charged, but this system also has 3 nitrogen 2,000 psi accumulators that kind of give like extra throw to the hydraulic system because there's so much of a
load on them,
change in load because the retardant is so heavy, basically. So it makes it so that when you can open and close the doors and the hydraulic system has time to catch up because it's got that little backup of the gas that's compressible. That's
helping making the doors more snappy in their operation.
Yeah.
Quicker. And the retardant itself is heavy. It's about what, 8 pounds per gallon?
Yeah, I forget exactly, but I think it's about 8 pounds.
And the retardant is kind of a mixture of clay and fertilizer and red dye, so that you can see it.
Yeah, that's why it has the red color, so that we can see where it already is in the ground and tag and extend and link into the previous drop.
And what's this other tank right behind you here?
This is our AWI, or alcohol water injection system. So it's a mixture of alcohol and water that, especially out of like Grass Valley on a warmer day when we're at high density altitudes, we can turn that on, and it injects that solution into the intakes and cools down the air going into the engines and increases our performance.
Is this an example of one of those?
Yeah, that's one of those negative pressure relief valves. So there's a huge volume coming out when the retardant comes out, so we have a bunch of those.
Can you hear those things cycling, or is there so much noise in the aircraft you don't even hear that?
Well, the tank opening itself and everything that's going on in the drop, you definitely hear that. I don't really distinguish between those and everything else.
All the rest of the racket that's going on. So here we are in the front office of the S2-T, and right away you can see you got pretty good visibility out of these aircraft with big bubble windows here, and you're wearing a flight helmet all the time and flight suit.
Yeah. The helmet, because when you're down low to the ground with a lot of the winds that happen around here and thermals from the fire and stuff, it can get pretty bumpy.
Real bumpy. So you're bumping your head up against
you get knocked out.
So being a carrier-operated aircraft, all your power levers are located overhead. So what do we got here?
So we've got our power levers here, basically like the gas pedal, and our condition levers, which set the RPMs of the engine. So we'll put it into high to get 100% RPM for critical phases of flight, like takeoff, landing, and the drop. And then when we're at cruise, we can bring it back into low.
And then are these friction locks up here?
Yep. Those are friction locks just to make sure that they stay up.
And your landing gear is located way up here.
Here's our gear and here's our flaps.
And the flaps, wow, right there. All right. So let's see, going down the line here, we got torque is your number 1 gauge, followed by EGT and RPM, fuel flow.
Yep, and it's all based on percentages.
Mm-hmm.
So
and then your standard VFR panel, you guys are basically a VFR operation at all times, right?
Yeah, they don't keep all of our instruments checked for instrument flying, and then we also don't really train to it or stay current with it in this job. Many of our pilots do separately, but basically if the weather is IMC, we can't.
You're not
really
flying anyways. You've got to be.
We drop like 150 feet above the vegetation, so you need to be able to.
Right, it's got to be VFR conditions.
Yeah.
And one of the most critical pieces of equipment are right there. You've got an angle of attack indicator, and you use that a lot on your landings, right?
We use that a ton in our landings and our drop patterns. You know, the most accurate indicator of impending stall is always AOA. So whether it's an accelerated stall, whether it's just a normal stall but your weight is different than normal, the angle of attack is always what indicates that. So on our drop patterns, we try and fly our drop patterns at a 0.6 so that we're still have plenty of lift and maneuverability. And then for landings, we do the base turn at a 0.6 and final at a 0.7. So it's gonna be loud for a second.
Yeah.
So this 8H is landing.
Yeah. They're doing a little training, aren't they?
Yeah.
Good.
We have a trainee flying with Colin Rogers right now, so they're practicing loaded landings here because this is a pretty challenging airport to land at loaded. But yeah, because we can come in and land with different retardant loads and fuel loads, and the weight of the aircraft is super variable. We have some like general target airspeeds for like empty or full, which would be, if we were full, it's about 125 knots on the base turn and 115 on final, and if we're empty, it's 110 and 100. But those loads always vary. Like say we did a partial drop and then come back with some retardant. So for that reason, the angle of attack is a better, like a more accurate indication of
because you can stall an airplane at any airspeed, but only at one critical angle of attack. And so the angle of attack is always the same number and the most accurate thing, regardless of how much you weigh. Or how many G's you're pulling.
Exactly.
Okay, so tell us about this tank system here.
Yeah, so this is our tank computer. We get that readout over here, shows us what we've selected in our tank quantity. And then the main controls we have here is arming it and putting the landing gear warning disable on. And then here's that coverage level I was talking about before. So we take off with it at a coverage level 3 so that if we lost an engine and jettisoned the load, it doesn't immediately come out. It has like a more gradual.
Oh, really?
It takes a few seconds to come out so that it increases like the controllability of the aircraft, single engine.
Wow. So, all right. I didn't know that. And then in order to do that emergency jettison, would he just nail the pickle switch on the yoke?
Well, yeah, first we would go to our normal button right here, this red button. And we actually, after we get the power all set and everything on takeoff, we hold our thumb there so that if anything happens, our thumb's already there. That's how important it is that we get rid of the load, because as we saw, the retardant's like 8.8 pounds per gallon. So if you're carrying 1,000 or 1,200 gallons, it's almost a third of the weight of the aircraft. So if we lost an engine here at Grass Valley and couldn't get rid of the load, we would not be able to stop or take off.
Right, that's how you make your balanced field length, so to speak. The only way to make the numbers work is if you dump the load.
Dump the load after a certain point, which is our V1 is 90 knots. So.
And that's why you see such long takeoff rolls here at Grass Valley, because all those numbers are made with the assumption that you're going to pickle your load.
Yep.
Uses a lot of runway.
So typically we would hit that button, and then if something happened, like with the hydraulic system, electric system, or the tank computer itself, and that didn't work, we have the standby system, which is 1,500 psi of nitrogen. And so we just punch that button, and it's directly linked to the battery, so it bypasses all other systems. So if I hit that right now, I would drop all the retardant on the...
And that would be a big mess,
ramp.
and that wouldn't be the first time that's happened, I don't
Right.
think either.
It's definitely happened before.
And then tell me about that ADI. How do you add the ADI into your takeoff roll?
The AWI,
Uh-huh.
the alcohol water injection.
Mm-hmm.
So we arm it right here, and then this little button is
Oh,
what
okay.
actually turns it on. So basically my process is I'd turn out onto the runway, I'd push up my power just a little bit, make sure I'm getting that minimum 100 RPM, 100% RPM. And then as it's stabilizing and I'm getting all straight and starting to roll, I push the button. These two blue lights come on that show that the system's working. You can also hear the water, and then you'll see like a torque bump of about 10%. And then once that's all engaged, then you push your power all the way up.
And you just push and forget that switch, right?
Yeah, you just
one tap.
engage it with one tap. And then this little button here is what turns it off when you're done.
And when do you usually turn it off?
I turn it off typically right after the gear comes up, unless for some reason it seems like I need it longer, and then I'll leave it on until I'm really safely clear of the ground.
And you have enough water to run all day, or at least for a tank?
About 7 takeoffs, I would say.
And about what temperature do you like to use that up?
Here at Grass Valley, I started at 80 degrees.
80 degrees?
Fahrenheit.
Yeah, start using it. All right, well, now talk us about the art of the drop. When do you know when to drop, and how does the aircraft react when you drop the retardant?
So, do you mean like when to push the button?
Yeah.
So it's definitely, like you said, it is definitely an art. There's no instruments that tell us what to do. It's just us looking out, and we're taking a ton of things into consideration. Aircraft speed, altitude, which generally we try and keep exactly the same every time to limit those variables.
Which is 150.
We drop it 120 knots and generally 150 feet above the vegetation. And so keeping those variables the same at least eliminates some things. But then we also have slope. So if the retardant's falling down slope, it's going to fall further or drift further. And then wind speed is a big part of it. So we try and keep that airspeed and altitude, AGL, or actually above the vegetation, the same every time. Sometimes if you're dropping down a really steep canyon or hillside or something like that, and you can't maintain that 120 and you've picked up a little bit of speed, you have to then calculate the retardant's going to go further because I'm faster, and it's going to go further because it's going downhill. So there's a lot of things that you're calculating in your head. So that, you have to think about all those things when you're thinking about.
And of course, the whole idea is for the retardant to rain down gently on the foliage at that.
That's why we have that 150 foot above the vegetation, because that's generally the established altitude at which the retardant stops its forward trajectory, because it's moving, simple physics, it's moving forward the same speed as the aircraft is.
Initially,
so when we drop it, it actually is basically like throwing the retardant out of the plane, the same as you would throw a ball. So it takes a certain distance and time for it to transition from going forward for gravity to pull it straight down. So that 150 feet ensures that it will always be falling straight down in a nice rain. That's kind of twofold. One, for safety, because as we said, it's like 8.8 pounds per gallon. So if it still has a lot of forward momentum on it, when it hits the ground, it can knock over trees, knock over cars, it can kill someone, destroy a structure, that kind of thing. And then also, we don't want to get shadowing on the fuels. So the retardant only really works if it coats the fuel entirely. And if it has a lot of forward momentum on it, it'll only paint one side of the fuel. If you think of like throwing a bucket of something on someone and the front side isn't covered. It's just dropping it on their head.
And it's still high and dry on the back side of it.
Yeah.
And then what about the aircraft itself? Is there a big change in pitch or flying characteristics of the aircraft as the retardant's coming out?
So this aircraft, or the transition to making it a tanker was done really well. So the tank is made so that it doesn't actually change the center of gravity of the aircraft. Some of the other planes, that does happen, and it makes it like pretty challenging off the drop and stuff. But for this plane, the center of gravity stays the same. So the main thing that you'll get is just a ballooning effect, because all of a sudden a third of the weight of the aircraft disappears, especially if you're at like a coverage level 6. The retardant comes out in like a second or two. So it gets a third lighter in just a couple seconds. So your weight to lift ratio changes a lot, and you'll balloon a lot, but it won't actually like pitch nose up really aggressively or nose down or anything like that.
So are you anticipating the drop and coming in with the forward stick and trim at the same time, or?
I usually would trim afterwards. I don't like doing the trim when I'm close to the ground in case, especially trimming down,
good point. Runaway trim.
So at 150 feet, you don't want to be pushing the trim down. So I'll just hold it. But sometimes with a coverage 6, especially if you're a little fast because you're dropping down a steep slope and you can't stay at that 120 all the way down, you have to really pull the yoke forward when you're dropping it. And you also want to contour the terrain so that the line stays straight. If you're going down a hill and you start ballooning and start going like this and aren't following the slope of the terrain, then your retardant's going to drift more towards the bottom, and it won't be in the straight line that you want it.
You'll see it like a big J hook on the drop.
Drift into the fire. So those are all the things we're thinking about. Man,
lots to think about there. And you're dropping with some flaps?
Yep, we drop with full flaps so that we can get down, because like I said, a lot of the times we're dropping deep down in a canyon, and we need a lot of drag to get way down there.
Now, again, the whole idea of fire retardant is just that. It's to retard the spread of the fire, and your main job is to back up the boots on the ground, the guys on the ground, right? So you're just buying them some time such that they can establish proper fire breaks like dozer lines or hand lines.
The thing that puts out fires the fastest is the dozer.
Yeah.
And then the guys on the ground also. But the retardant is to slow it down and kind of like shift the direction it's going, things like that. But if you put retardant on a fire and then just leave it, eventually it will burn through.
It will burn through.
Yep, so we're just trying to slow it down so the guys on the ground can put it out.
Excellent. So how did you find out about this job, and what got you here? First off, where did you understand you went to the Air Force Academy?
Yeah.
Wow.
That's where
Are you like one of the first CalFire Air Force Academy graduates that came from the academy?
No, actually, we have Bo Miller is the other pilot who's in 8-9 when I'm in 8-8.
Yeah.
He was, I think, a 99 grad.
Yeah.
So he was a grad, and then one of our air attack pilots,
wow.
Acer, is also a grad. So.
And what did you fly after the academy for the Air Force?
I flew C-17s and MC-12s.
And then between there and here, how did you end up here after all that?
Well, I flew as a contractor, flying the MC-12 some more in Afghanistan, and then I did a little bit of corporate charter, and I was just trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I was neighbors of the lead pilot at the time, Chuck Lees, who...
Oh, yeah.
I was his neighbor in Sacramento. And so I had kind of heard about CalFire, but I wasn't a California native, so I didn't know that much about it. And then I moved here to Grass Valley, and I was considering applying to the airlines, but I wasn't super stoked on it because I just thought it wouldn't be the most fun flying. And my friend Shelly Allen was the chief of the Tahoe National Forest, and she was a smoke jumper and hotshot and everything, really badass lady. And she told me to come down here and talk to her friends who flew. So I started coming down to Grass Valley Air Attack Base and talking to Jimmy Barnes and Hoser.
Oh man, you met some of the biggest characters in the whole. They didn't scare you off?
No. So I just kind of learned more about the job that way and came down several times. And then they put me in contact with the leads, and I applied and got the job.
That's it. So you need to, if you're interested in this kind of a career, you kind of need to deal directly with the people. You need to meet and greet them.
Pretty much. You need to, show your face at a base, get to know some of the people. The big thing is that it takes 2 years to train a tanker pilot.
Yeah.
And it's a really close-knit, small group. It's not like an airline where they have 11,000 pilots that they can just, you know, if they quit, they can fill the space, you know. So we need to know that people are super committed and really want to do this job. And it's also a really hard job. And it's challenging, it's dangerous. I mean, we try and mitigate as much risk as we can by having really good operating procedures and good training and stuff, which we do, but it's, you know,
it's high stress.
Yeah. So we want to know that somebody really wants to do it
and can hack it. And as a tanker pilot, you are a contract pilot, correct?
Yep, we work for Amentum. That's the main contractor, and then CalFire is sort of Amentum's customer. CalFire owns all the aircraft, and then Amentum manages and employs the pilots. So it's kind of twofold. It's like we have two bosses. We have Amentum, and then when we're here at the base, the battalion chief, well, our battalion chief here would say he's not my boss, but we're just a team, but but we sort of answer to them.
Yeah, yep, they're your main customer. And then, so 10 on, 5 off, but over the course of a year, it's still a seasonal job.
Depending on what base you're at. So here at Grass Valley, we usually work from like the end of May to mid-November. It doesn't usually go into December. But further south, like Columbia, even just, I mean, that's just a little bit further south from here, they go into December consistently. And then bases like Ramona, which is down near San Diego, or Hemet, which is kind of closer to LA, they go almost year-round, like 11 months a year. So that's why that 10 and 5 schedule is really essential, especially for them.
Yeah, because otherwise you'd burn out in a hurry.
Right.
Wow. But otherwise, the pay scales here are competitive with airlines.
It is. So yeah, I mean, we have a day rate, so we're paid on a daily basis for days that we work. It's not based on flight hours or anything like that. But if you work, like I worked 140 days last year, and I made on par with what a captain at a major airline was
Wow,
making.
that's good.
So, yeah,
Finally, it's taken a long time to do that.
Yeah, when our CFPA, the California Fire Pilots Association, was initially established, maybe 15 or 20 years ago, I'm not really sure. That gave us a big bump up in pay and benefits and everything like that. So our elders kind of paved the way for us there. And then more recently, we renegotiated the contract, and the big thing was getting the new schedule. And it also came along with an appropriate pay raise to compensate for the additional days off.
Good.
So it's
because of the days lost. Yeah.
Right. So it's a pretty lucrative, good job, and the most fun flying I've ever had. So.
That's it. Well, thanks so much. That's Abbie Cruz,
okay,
tanker pilot, Tanker 88, Tanker 89, Grass Valley Air Attack Base.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Grass Valley Air Attack Base, new order 3250, number 223 from Hotel.
Did you get your dispatch? All right.
Might just be a burn pile. So
Yeah. 5 to 10 acres and some vehicles.